Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we got something special. The compilation album produced by Dave Cobb titled Southern Family. This has easily been my most anticipated album of 2016. And to explain why, we need to go back a long ways back to 1978 and an independent country release called White Mansions. Written by singer-songwriter Paul Kennerly, it was the rarest sort of release in country music. A narrative-driven concept album containing multiple artists each playing a distinctive part. This was at the height of the outlaw movement in country, and as such it recruited artists like John Dillon, Steve Cash, Jesse Coulter, and Waylon Jennings himself, even pulling on Eric Clapton and play guitar on a couple songs. And while the tighter budget definitely shows at a couple points, the ambition was unmistakable. This was the story of the Civil War from the South's point of view, but pulled zero punches about the roots of the conflict and the deep lingering scars left on the American psyche, especially in the South. I can say bluntly that the political fallout would make such a record impossible to make today, and I can say, without hyperbole, that it is a classic country album. And if you're lucky enough to find a copy, I cannot recommend it highly enough. So okay, why is any of that relevant? Well, if you've been watching the resurgence of outlaw country around the edges of Nashville, you shouldn't even be surprised at this point. Over the past 2 to 3 years in the increasingly sterile and meat-headed modern country scene, the independent scene has expanded like never before. Part of this is the rise of the internet, which allows local acts to gain some real groundswell, but at the epicenter is one incredibly gifted producer whose hands have touched most of the best country records of the past couple of years, Dave Cobb. Now, I've raved about this guy a number of times on my channel, and if you know his production background, you'll understand why. But what you probably don't know is his work behind the scenes, becoming the new caretaker of the legendary Studio A in Nashville, and establishing his own publishing imprint, which gives him the ability to foster greater talent. Of course, it's also what matters that he's produced some of the best indie country albums of the past few years, from Sturgill Simpson's meta-modern sounds in country music, to Jason Isbell's Something More Than Free, to Lindy Ortega, to the Grammy-winning debut album Traveler from Chris Stapleton. And all this has given him the clout and the budget to pursue the sort of passion project country fans don't even dare to dream about. A concept record partially inspired by White Mansions with the sort of lineup that would seem impossible. Let's run through the list, shall we? Jason Isbell, Chris and Morgane Stapleton, Jamey Johnson, Brandy Clark, Holly Williams, Brent Cobb, Anderson East, Shooter Jennings, John Paul White, formerly the Civil Wars, Rich Robertson, the Black Crowes, and not to completely exclude the mainstream, Zac Brown and Miranda Lambert. This is an Arion-style project for country music from one of the best producers in the industry, which meant while this is my most anticipated project in 2016, it was also the one where I had the highest of expectation. I mean, could Dave Cobb actually pull this off? Well, folks, honest to God, I put off this review for a number of days because I was struggling a lot to figure out how I'd rate it. Because, make no mistake, not only is there not a single bad song on this album, I'd argue that at least half this record I describe as outright incredible and contenders for my favorite songs of 2016. And yet, is it worth that score that I don't think I've ever awarded on this channel? Well, let's go find out. And when we want to consider compilation albums like this, the first immediate question comes in the talent brought on board, especially when you have so many disparate and defiantly unique voices. You have some that are coming from a much rougher country tradition, like Brent Cobb, or Anderson East, or Morgane Stapleton, or Holly Williams. Their rasp and bite in their voices shows a weathered presence that adds some real texture to their songs. And on the other side, you get the much smoother, borderline neo-traditional country tones you get from Zac Brown, or Brandy Clark, or even Jamey Johnson playing a more subdued tone absolutely beautifully. And then you got the middle ground, John Paul White opting for some of the most soulful vocals of his entire career that he never showed off as well when he was in the Civil Wars. I might have liked that act a lot more. And you have Jason Isbell's wry delivery that underscores the cleverness in his writing, Miranda Lambert sounding more at home in country than she has in years, and Shooter Jennings, well, okay, look, he'll never have his father's pipes in the same way, but his exuberance comes at a critical point on the album that really cannot be overstated. And everyone here is at their best in their respective ranges. And make no mistake, some of this material is not easy to pull off well. Now, we'll come back to content in a little bit, but it's key we focus on instrumentation and production. And having been through this album so many times, I can't find any flaws. I'm as stunned as anybody, but there's not a single instrumental moment that goes awry, not a single texture or production choice that feels out of place to the respective tracks. Now, I'm adding that qualification respective tracks because in terms of the country sounds that Dave Cobb introduces, this record really is kind of all over the map, sometimes going right to the fringes touches of what might be traditionally defined as country, especially with the meteor electric guitars that show up on You Are My Sunshine, or the blues and soul touches of Learning, complete with prominent bass and horns of the Muscle Shoals theme, or the country rock rollick of Can You Come Over, or the outright gospel of The Way Home, anchored in a rough-edged, fuzzed-out guitar lick, which is perfectly balanced to bring in that country touch. Now, some of you might have been worried that the vintage touches that are showing up in a lot of Dave Cobb's production might overtake this album. Well, they do come up in a few places, most notably in the strings texture that fleshes out the background, a simple song, or Sweet By and By, or I Cried, but they never compromise the fidelity of the recording, which is crisp, clear, and full of some of the most gorgeous textured melodies that you will hear this year. And really, I find more every time I go through this album. But between that stellar fiddle on God Is a Working Man, to the fantastic steel guitar on Sweet By and By and I Cried, to the subtle organ on Grandma's Garden that gets some great bite on Learning, to the piano that anchors so many of these songs, if only just a little bit, the melodic hooks are always there, and they never feel conventional or formulaic. And then we have got the guitar work and the guitar solos, and look, I might not have been blown away by the content on Down Home or Can You Come Over, but the bite, texture, and playing on those solos won me over regardless. Although, really, you then get the meteor dark tones on You Are My Sunshine, with the solo that just elongates that groove to a killer moment of release. It's fantastic. But that's just the showier parts. What really caught me off guard were the quieter moments, the warmth and subtlety that show up on Mama's Table and Grandma's Garden and the acoustic lines, or the folk-inspired layering on Settle Down. And while I can see why some might think the horns on Learning or the blast of harmonica on Can You Come Over might feel a little broad, they end up working as broad moments of somewhat levity that are desperately needed on this record, and points must be given for the track sequencing. This album get very dark and very tragic. You need those brighter moments to prevent this album from dragging, and the shift in tone never creates a feel of whiplash somehow. It's kind of amazing. But now, we have to get into content and the themes of this album. And the first thing to know is that despite this record being called Southern Family and being a country record inspired by white mansions, the writing aims for a different target than beyond just the South in the United States. If anything, the greater focus is on family, mothers and fathers and grandparents and children often torn apart, but trying to hold things together with traditions that they want to hold dear. And yet, on the opening line of the song, sung by John Paul White on a song where he struggled to move past his grief, the line is, "You're gonna die. You're gonna die." Hand in hand with family comes the inevitability of losing them, and this record is not gonna pull any punches. And while there is no narrative to the chain of deaths that run through this album, there is a thematic through line and arc. Jason Isbell looks at God with less awe and more like the humble common man trying to save as many as he possibly can, but of course only if they want it. In other words, probably closer than the actual gospel to most modern religion, and yes, I'm making a point there. And while Brent Cobb sees minor tensions brushed aside in the sanctuary of a simple home, Miranda Lambert follows it with warnings to cherish that family and home because it can so easily slip away. A warning that will manifest in two distinctive ways throughout this album: the internal crises that we can control that more often than not tears families apart, and the forces of nature that we can't control. Hell, it's one of the reasons why the inclusion of Morgane Stapleton's cover of You Are My Sunshine with her husband Chris is kind of ingenious at this point of the album. Normally a lullaby and a profession of love, but she goes to the full version, all the verses, and places much darker, minor tones, almost implying a threat should her partner ever choose to leave her. An arc that would later resurface on Learning as Anderson East's father sees his marriage collapse, and then come to the realization that he's still teaching himself how to be a man just as he teaches his son. A moment with real punch when you consider how valued that patriarch role is in the South. Go a step further, you see a relationship just sputter out naturally with Holly Williams' Settle Down, which ends on a deeply somber note that despite the breakups and makeups, there still is that insecurity. And yet on the flip side though, there are plenty of endings that are plenty certain, which is this surprisingly affecting Grandma's Garden from Zac Brown of all people. And here's the thing about that song. Sure, it's a little bit corny in the garden metaphor, he doesn't need to explain it, but I remember when my own grandfather passed away a couple years ago and I did the eulogy, a lot of my own references were coached through very similar, very simple language, making things smaller in order to build those emotional contexts and remember the best of times of even those little moments. That's why Jamey Johnson's understated take on Mama's Table has impact, showing both the good times and the bad times lodged in the little things, or the absolutely devastating I Cried from Brandy Clark as the grandmother struggles to move on from her grandfather's death, because in the end, you're gonna die. And then we've got the ending. But putting aside Shooter Jennings' brief and admittedly welcome moment of respite, which seems to come from the evolving perspective of a kid growing up in that southern world, the album closer, The Way Home, begins the sounds of the road ahead as the guitars and organ peel out. Perhaps after coming home to the South to reconnect and find that sense of place and family in the face of death, eyes are turning now to the opening road and the path ahead, moving on. And then that gospel choir comes in, rough around the edges but still soulful, with the mantra that even in the face of inevitable death, they gotta see up in heaven. and everything's gonna be alright. You should hold on to family and tradition, those little things that tie us together, but there is a way to let them go. Death might be inevitable, but there's a way to make that bearable. And even as fragile humanity pulls us all apart, you can still hold on to hope. We got that at least. Folks, at this point, I'm struggling to find criticisms for this album. The closest I can find is songs like Down Home and Connecting Over that can feel a little bit trite in some of the subject matter, not quite having the same meat as the best songs here, but not only do the songs serve a valuable purpose in establishing the atmosphere and tone and detail of this album, they're still damn great country songs on their own, all contributing to the sound and color of this album. On their own albums, they probably show out as being better, some of the best songs on their respective records. Only here are they not standout tracks. That's because the talent on display is goddamn ridiculous. And sure, I can wish for a more concrete narrative or for Sturgill Simpson to have shown up, but at the end of the day, Dave Cobb, all his collaborators, they put together one hell of an album. So much personality and texture and emotive power. This is a record that shows exactly why I love country music. Even if you don't like country, I'd still recommend this on the basis of the compositions and writing with the variety, almost guaranteeing you'll find something to love here. But for me though, while there is no such thing as a perfect album, there's a place for acknowledging the very best, the ones that are born to be classics. I'm thinking a 10. If that's not an endorsement of what will probably be the best album of this year, I don't know what is. So you don't even need me to say it right now. Check this out. You will not regret it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe and be more than grateful. I can imagine what I just said there was pretty controversial, so yeah, let me know what you think. I got the poll there, so if you guys thought this was worth that high of a score, I'd love to hear your response. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, anything else coming out that I will try to give a listen, I'll be on it, I promise. I got a long weekend up ahead. But beyond that, till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.